When the price goes up, you're getting the same box of cereal you got last week, last month, last year before the price went up, but you're now giving more of your money for that box. That means you get the same amount of cereal you used to get, but you give up more money. And from the point of view of the employer, who's clapping his or her hands, they're giving you the same box of cereal, but they're getting more money out of your pocket.
Yeah, but it's important to understand, and what you're missing here is that they also have to spend more for a lot of items they're buying, especially supplies. Inflation affects everything that's purchased. So if the employer in this case, yes, he's getting more money in his pocket. At the same time, though, he's paying a lot more money to get the supplies he needs to sell goods. So he's also losing money. That's why prices go up. You gave such a rudimentary definition of inflation and then still missed one of the biggest components of it. And I know that you're purposely ignoring it because there's no way you can study economics and then totally miss that fact.
In other words, an inflation moves wealth from the buyer to the seller. That's what it's for.
That's what it's for.
And they
Okay.
know.
So inflation isn't for anything because inflation is a bad consequence of bad policy, period. It's not like people implement inflation on purpose to do things. Okay. At least not any capitalist. So I don't know what he means by that's what it's for, as if it's implemented on purpose.
You might be angry about that. You might decide that you are being, here we go, ripped off. You might be even more angry if there was an honest explanation saying to you, we just raised the price of the shoes, of the blouse, of the hamburger, of the box of cereal because we want to make more profit in this company. That might make you upset.
Okay, so there's two issues. I could see why you'd be upset if they did that to make more profit and there was no inflation. But I don't understand how somebody could get mad working for somebody when they raise prices due to inflation. Maybe somebody who doesn't understand anything about economics would be upset about that, but no rational person would be incredibly upset that prices went up due to the fact that inflation is happening. That's very normal. So I don't really get the problem there.
Because you'd be confronted with that reality. It's bad for you to pay more, and it's good for them to get you to do it. So the capitalist class, when there's an inflation, becomes a very loud about scapegoating somebody else. You see, that's helpful to them. They want us to believe that they didn't raise their prices to make more profits or to protect the profits they already were earning. No, 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 no. They only did it because they were, get ready, get your handkerchief, forced to do. And let me give you some examples. Here's the very popular one. We wouldn't have raised the price, we employers, but we had to. Really? Why? Well, the workers were getting or demanding more wages. So we had to raise our prices to cover the higher wages. And we wouldn't have done it if it hadn't been those awful working people who demanded more.
Yeah, this is simply a consequence of running a business, right? A wage is part of the cost of a company. So if people want more money, that's fine. They can get paid more. But of course, the company's going to protect their profit. And he said that that's not what they're doing it for, but I don't know why else they'd say that. Because he's saying, well, they're not saying to do it to protect their profits, and then says, but they're doing it to protect their profits. And I mean, he's absolutely right here. Yes, prices will go up if employees demand more money because a business isn't just going to take that loss. Now, you could say, well, that's corrupt and unfair, but that's the cost of profit. You can pursue two costs in a society, in a market. You can pay the cost of inefficiency. You can pay the cost of profit. Said by Thomas Sowell, and the cost of profit is a cheaper cost than the cost of inefficiency in a market.
This is almost always a lie. It would be a lie right now, and the way to explain that is very simple. Prices are rising in this country by 7 to 8%. Average wages are rising around 5.25%. So obviously, even if there is some grain of truth to the notion that you're paying higher wages. You're jacking up your prices well beyond all of that. So
I'll get into this point a little bit more later because this is a deeper issue that isn't necessarily rooted in capitalism. Because this issue that he's bringing up, yes, wages are going up by 5%. That's actually really good. And then he's like, well, inflation's going up higher, therefore it's business is corruption. I'd argue it's not that, and there's more complicated economic reasons why, which again I'll get to later. But he's ignoring the fact that a 5% growth in wage is good and totally cementing the fact that inflation's higher and then blames inflation on capitalists, not the government. And he talks about this later, and I'll get into it.
let's be honest. Moreover, workers have a hard time getting higher wages. They usually use the argument, our prices are going up, please give us more. But they have a clear problem. The employer may decide not to agree to that. And then what do? In the private sector of our country, less than 7% of workers are in unions.
Thank
So
God.
they can't strike. The vast majority have no union. Those who do have a union have another problem. Most unions have a contract with the employer that covers wages for 2 to 3 years. You can't raise them in that period. So even if prices are going up, you have to wait for the contract to expire 1, 2, 3 years from now before you can even ask.
Thank goodness
And
it's
not at all
consensual to enter
clear
those kinds
that
of
you will
operations.
get.
You're
So
not forced
blaming
to
the enter an
workers,
operation
that you view
that's
as
a
bad.
cheap
That'd
shot,
be really
cheap
horrible if it
out,
wasn't that way.
most of the time very minimally relevant. Here's another one that's really popular these days. There have been disruptions in the supply chain. All right, let me translate that into English.
I thought it was.
Somehow, goods are not getting through,
Yep.
and so they're scarce, you see.
He's saying it
And
as
if
if
we
that's
all
not
want
a
them,
true
but
thing.
they're scarcer than they used to be, those who have some of these scarce items to sell can and will jack up the price. But we should.
Okay, so this is like one of the most fundamental things in economics. It's scarcity. Everyone will hear of scarcity. Scarcity is what drives, it's the reason economy has to exist. Thomas Sowell talks about it in the very beginning of his book, Basic Economics, because it's the most fundamental thing to understand when delving into any economic topic. You have two choices, right? So he's saying scarcity is driving up prices, and that is unfair. So let me explain why it isn't unfair. You have two options if things are scarce. And in Thomas Sowell's book, he uses the example of houses, nice houses on the coast. Not everyone can get a nice house on the coast. There isn't enough coastal land for every single person to get a nice, beautiful house on the coast. Hence, why these houses cost so much money. They're very desirable, and they're also very scarce because there isn't enough. So, Richard here, an absolute moron, would be upset about that. Richard would be upset that these houses are more expensive just because they're more scarce. That's what he's saying right now. He's mocking people, saying that you shouldn't get upset about that. So, what's the proposed solution? All right, let's say we just keep the prices the same as normal houses. What this does is essentially create a lottery system. First come, first serve. Either way, the same amount of people are going to get these houses, but now it's going to be at random. The point of a free market and the point of capitalism is that so somebody who's worked harder, who has more merit, can build an accumulation of wealth that will allow them to buy that kind of house. This gives motivation for people to work harder, to make more money, and to innovate. Hopefully, in a good market, people would be innovating a lot to make more money. So it's not like if you don't drive up prices, everybody would get it. The reason prices go up is when there's scarcity is so, yes, you will probably sell the same amount, but people who make less money won't be able to get it. Either way, the same amount of people will or will not get the product. It's just a matter of who's getting it. And it's based on a merit system, which is, in my opinion, a good way to run an economy because you don't want unproductive people to be able to accumulate a bunch of resources that somebody who worked really hard for should be able to get. Because now you're going to demotivate a hardworking class of people to work harder because, well, they don't need to work hard to get these products.
Be angry at them, you see. They're just taking advantage of some disruption in the.
They're not taking advantage of it. They're capitalizing on the fact that there's scarcity in the market. They have to raise their prices. It's just basic economics when running a business, and I don't know how you don't understand this, Richard. When things are scarce, you raise the prices. If you had, and I apologize, I have to, dumb down the language this much, but he's so absurdly stupid that this is the analogy I have to give. Imagine you have 10 bananas and I have 100 apples. You would not exchange one of your bananas for one of my apples. Obviously, the bananas are worth more than my apples. The same is true in any form of scarcity. If something is scarce, you pay more or bargain more to get that product. That's just common sense. A kindergartner could understand that concept.
Supply chain. Calling it a disruption in the supply chain is cute.
Why, when
It
that's
is a
exactly
way
what's
of
happening? There's a
focusing
disruption in the
people's
supply chain
attention
causing
on
scarcity. I don't
something
understand why
else.
that's cute.
We can be reminded that there was a big freighter stuck in the Suez Canal a few months ago, and we saw the funny pictures, and maybe that has something to do
That
with
does,
it.
it does have something to
Well,
do
my
with it.
answer is let's not be naive. Every businessman and woman knows that if you can restrict the supply, that then becomes a way to force up the price. All the people who want whatever you're restricting the supply of will compete with one another, bidding up the price to get whatever is scarce. You can pretend that all the scarcity is a force of nature. It just happened. I don't know how it would happen. It just a
I
disrupted
don't
supply.
understand if in this part he is denying the fact that there can be disruptions in a supply chain. It almost sounds like he doesn't believe that's possible. And if he does, I'd like to hear his explanation of what you should do if there is a disruption in the supply chain, because he seems to be completely ignoring the fact that that's possible. He makes fun of the Suez Canal as if that didn't actually happen. He almost sounds conspiratorial when talking about it, and maybe this is like a socialist conspiracy I'm not aware of, where they think it was all planned out to raise prices. But, anyways.
Chain, but that naivete is really silly. We have a supply chain disruption because it's profitable for the sellers of goods to use
See, right now
scarcity
it really
to
sounds
jack
like he's
up
saying it's a
their
conspiracy.
profits by raising their prices. And then there's the one I like the most. I call it the libertarian ploy.
That's me, guilty as charged.
Libertarians are
Let's see what we got.
very, very, very useful to capitalism
I hope so. I
because
love
they
capitalism.
blame all of its problems on the government.
This is really good so
This
far.
is wonderful.
That's
It
a really good
allows a
definition.
business to kick its workers, and the workers get angry, not at the business that kicks them, but at the government. It
Yeah, okay,
allows a
we're getting
bank to
off
throw
track a
you
little
out
bit
of
here.
your home because you haven't covered your mortgage, and you get angry at
No, so if I
the
get thrown out
politician.
of my home because I didn't pay my mortgage, if I was mad at anybody else but myself, unless if there's some extrinsic circumstances, some crazy circumstances, I'm gonna be just mad at myself. If I didn't pay my mortgage, that's nobody's fault. Are you saying you should blame the bank if you get uh, kicked out of your house? That's just foregoing responsibility. If you signed a contract to agree to a mortgage and then you weren't able to pay it, why would you be mad at anyone except yourself? Unless if there's again some wild circumstances. A libertarian wouldn't say you should blame politicians when you get thrown out of your home. You should be mad at yourself that you entered a contract that you can't fulfill.
Not the bank that evicted you, not the corporation that fired you. It's remarkable. And true enough, the libertarians come through. And why do we have an inflation? They want us to believe the answer, the government. And not just the government anywhere, but the
Who else?
government
Who else caused the
that
inflation,
runs
please?
the money system, the Federal
That's actually a good
Reserve,
point.
our
The Federal Reserve isn't
central bank.
technically the government. We buy money from the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve just dumps money, and they can do something called quantitative easing, which is something I'm not going to cover here. But essentially buying and selling their own bonds to change the supply of money, to artificially change interest rates, to slow the spending or speed up spending. But yeah, it's absolutely printing of money that causes inflation. I don't know what else would cause inflation. Maybe there's just something I'm missing or I'm uneducated on. It's possible. But yes, generally speaking, inflation is caused by the printing of money. The money is bought by the government, sold by the Federal Reserve. This causes inflation. The more money you have in the supply, um, the less the money has value. And he's going to say something so unbelievably stupid in a second here. I can't wait. The first time I watched this video, my heart sank when I heard it because I was so angry and wanted to respond to him so bad. Unfortunately, he's not here in person for me to like Will Smith slap him, so we're going to have to just make a video about
So
it.
they love to tell stories about how the central bank has been pumping money into
Tell
the economy,
stories.
which is
It's not
true,
even real, guys. They don't even
and
do it.
that money is now enabling prices to go up. That's true too, but it doesn't face a simple fact. The Federal Reserve has been pumping massive amounts of money into the American economy every year since the year 2000.
They've been doing it longer than that. And this is why that's stupid. He's essentially making the point that, well, they've been doing it for 22 years. We have, and no, I actually let him say his next sentence because it adds to the
22
stupidity.
years. And we only have an inflation this last year.
We've only had inflation this last year. No, Richard, we haven't. We've been experiencing inflation for a very long time. You're telling me that we've only been experiencing inflation for 1 year. So if I go back to the 1950s, let's say I'm somebody from 2018. If I go back to the 1950s, are prices the same? No. Okay. But I thought we were only experiencing inflation for 1 year. I don't understand. Obviously this is stupid, and I'm exaggerating what he said, but the stupidity is still there. We've only been experiencing inflation this last year. First of all, inflation rates have been this high multiple times in the past 22 years. This is not the first time we've experienced inflation like this, and it's not the highest inflation rate we have experienced. So that's my first point. Second point, the Federal Reserve and the government would like to tell you an inflation rate around 1 to 2% is normal. It's not. You don't want any inflation in a good economy, at least incredibly low. So the idea that we've only been experiencing inflation for 1 year, or we've only been experiencing a reasonable amount of inflation, is it's just incorrect. Inflation's bad. It doesn't matter if it's 2%. It doesn't matter if it's 7%. And the idea that it's only been this high for a little bit is just complete. It's just completely incorrect, Richard. It's just totally dishonest. And I know for a fact, I know 100% that you know that there's been inflation this high multiple times in the past 22, even 50 years. So I don't understand why you're ignoring that when you're making this point, unless you have an agenda and you're lying to your audience.
Didn't have
Crazy,
it the
I
other
know.
19.
No, I
So
sound like I'm
pumping
conspiracy
money
theorist.
is clearly not the cause. Something else has
What
to
causes this
explain it.
inflation then?
And I think I did. There is very
Did you?
little
And then he goes
likelihood
next.
that this inflation is going to go away.
He just moves on.
anytime
He didn't give an
soon.
explanation. You gave no
The
explanation.
Ukraine issue. The
You said, I think I
sanctions,
did, and then
if
moved
they
on to talk
have
about
any
Ukraine.
effect, they will disrupt the global economy in
How?
a variety of
Maybe
ways.
supply chain issues?
That will, if the past is any guide, make it more likely that
Why?
prices will
Why
be
is it more
raised
likely prices will be
by
raised?
companies confronting disruptions in the global economy. I think we're
Disruptions in the
going to
global
see
economy. You mean disruptions in supply
every
chains.
business
That's what
in
you
the
mean, right?
world take advantage of all of this turmoil, use it as one of those convenient
Only the government's going to be using it
scapegoats
for their own
so they
good.
can get away with raising prices when it might have been harder to do so.